Okay, so now we're going to look at the second method that I said was in this section, which was completing the square. But just a couple of things here that you need to understand before we actually work the problems by completing the square. First of all, a perfect square trinomial, and this isn't something you have to have in your notes, just making you aware of what a perfect square trinomial is. Of course, a trinomial means that, you've got a polynomial that consists of three terms. So this is my perfect square trinomial. So if I were to tell you to factor this, of course we did factoring back in section 4.4, but the x squared minus 6x plus 9 actually factors this way, where the two parentheses or the two factors are exactly the same. And you had some of those. I just didn't make a big deal about the fact that they were called perfect square trinomials, because you factor them the same way as you factor any other trinomial. But since the two factors are the same, remember you can just write it one time and raise it to the second power. And that's what you're going to be dealing with a lot with completing the square, is needing a perfect square trinomial. And what we'll have to do is get used to writing it, of course this being the problem, but we're going to be writing it this way in order to be able to do some other steps. Okay, so just kind of practicing a little bit here on figuring out how to get a perfect square trinomial. Again, this is still not the whole process of completing the square, just like I said, getting us used to doing a couple of things. All right, so what you're asked to do here is to make a trinomial that is a perfect square trinomial. All right, so this first example, of course, I only have two terms, so the blank that I have here is where my third term needs to go in order to have this perfect square trinomial. Now, this is like your formula, okay? This is what you've got to remember to do in order to get this number that needs to be added here. All right, now it refers to b. So you've got b divided by 2 and squared, okay? So if you remember, b is always the number that's in front of the x that's to the first power. So in this example, that's going to be the negative 24. So take negative 24, plug it into this formula. So I'd have negative 24 divided by 2 and then square it. So this would give me negative 12. And then you square negative 12, you get a positive 144. So that's going to be the value that would be added here that will make this a perfect square trinomial. Now, I went ahead back up here with the formula, and I've got the word add. This is always going to be addition, because when you square something, it's always going to come out to be positive. So therefore, this is always addition. Okay, let's look at another one. So again, just figuring out what number do we need here to get the perfect square trinomial. So my value of b is the 8. So you need to do 8 divided by 2 and square it. So that's going to give me 4 squared, which will give me 16. So now I have what's called a perfect square trinomial. So this is actually part of the process that we're fixing to go through when we're actually asked to solve the whole equation. All right, so you've got a list of steps here that you are going to need to write down, so you'll have these to refer back to. I'm not going to do a lot of explaining to begin with. I'm going to just basically explain these steps as I go through the examples. So if you want to, you can just need to pause the video and write these down. Okay, now I'll have to scoot it up for you to see the rest of it. So like I said, just pause your video and get all the steps written down. Okay. So like I said, I'm gonna refer to those as I go through this first example, okay? All right, first step said to rewrite the equation in the form x squared plus bx equals c. Divide all terms of the equation by the coefficient of x squared if it is not a 1. Okay, so that last part where it said divide all terms by the equation if it's not 1, the number that you have in front of your x squared is supposed to be a positive 1, and actually that's all that we're going to look at. If you end up taking some other higher level math course, then you'll branch out from that just a little bit. All right, so this step right here, though, where it tells you to write it in the form of x squared plus bx equals c, that means that you need your constant on the other side. That would be the minus 3 here. So I would have x squared plus 6x. Now when you go to move or to add the 3 to the other side, I want you to leave that space right there, because that's where we're going to come back and make that perfect square trinomial like we were doing a while ago. So basically, that's step 1. The only thing you got to remember to do on step 1 is you need the constant on the right-hand side. Okay, step 2, it said complete the square by adding b divided by 2 squared to each side of the equation. So that's exactly what I was doing just a few minutes ago. My b value here is a 6. Therefore, I would have 6 divided by 2 and square it. So that would be 3 squared, which will give me 9. Now it said to add that value to each side. Now I didn't have that issue a while ago because I didn't have an equation a while ago. We were just learning how to use the formula. But since you've got an equation, as you've been told numerous times, what you do to one side of your equation, you have to do to the other. So 9 has to be added on each side. All right, then it says step 3, you need to factor the trinomial. Now, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier as well. If you factor this, and if you need to, you can go over to the side, or I'll just do it with pencil right here. When I say factor, just like 2 parentheses, okay? So x squared is x times x. With a 9, you would go with 3 times 3, and you would need both of those to be pluses in order to get your 6 in the middle. But you're going to have to write it as x plus 3 squared. Again, if you've put the correct number here, these 2 parentheses will be the same. Therefore, you just write it once to the second power. It has to be written this way in order to do the next step. All right, go ahead and combine the 3 and the 9 so you get your 12. Okay, so there's step 3. Step 4 says to take the square root of each side. Okay, so that's going back to what we were doing just a few minutes ago. If I take the square root of this, that's just simply going to make the square go away, and I'm left with what's inside the parentheses. Okay, put your plus minus, because you're taking square root. If you're taking square root of both sides, you got to put your plus minus. Then we're going to have square root 12. Okay, now I need to simplify the square root of 12. It's not a perfect square, but if you go back to that list of numbers that I had written down for you a while ago, this list, you've got to find what in this list will go into the 12, and it will be the 4. So 4 will go into 12 3 times. So square root of 4 will give me 2. The 3 is left underneath. And last step, to get x by itself, then you subtract your 3. There's your answer. Okay, so even though when you're writing those steps down, it looks like there's a whole bunch of stuff to have to do, but it doesn't require just a huge amount of steps. All right, let's look at one more, completing the square. Okay, going back to step 1, remember you do want your constant on the other side, which that's actually done for you this time. So I'm going to go ahead and make my space that I'm going to need here to figure out what I need to add to get that perfect square trinomial. All right, so this time my value of b is negative 10. So I'd have negative 10 divided by 2 and square it. So that's going to give me negative 5 squared, which will give me a positive 25. So I need to add 25 to both sides. Okay, so again, if you need to factor this into the 2 parentheses, you can, or if that's something that you can do in your head, then you can go ahead and go straight to what you would have here. Your 2 parentheses would end up being x minus 5 times x minus 5, if you were to factor that. So that would be x minus 5 squared. Add your 2 and your 25, so you get 27. Okay, now you're ready to take square root of both sides. So you take the square root of x minus 5 squared. That just leaves you with x minus 5. Put your plus minus, and then you also take the square root of the 27. Now, 27, again, is not a perfect square. You're not going to end up with just a nice little whole number. So go back to that list of numbers that I've referred to a couple of times already. Find what number in that list will go into 27 evenly, and that would be 9. So you would rewrite this as 9 times 3. So square root of 9 is 3, and then this 3 is just left underneath the radical. And last, you would add your 5. There's your answer.